grand aqueducts of the Roman Empire are one of the few hallmarks that are still associated with the Romans in this era. They were a feat of construction in the ancient world, one the Romans were very proud of. With these grand structures so numerous and indispensable, carrying so many waters, who indeed would compare the idol pyramids or other useless, although renowned, works of the Greeks? This quote by Sextus Iulius Frontinus gives a sliver of insight into the extreme importance of the aqueducts, both as a functional and artistic construction. Evidence of their majesty and constructional genius can be seen in the several landmarks still preserved and celebrated today, such as the Pont du Gard in southern France. What we have sought to look at in this documentary is the other side of these grand waterways. How did they influence the culture of the Roman people? Obviously, the implementation of massive amounts of water into an imperial city must have had some ramifications. What about the social status of those who now suddenly had the unlimited resource of a river right outside, or even inside, their home? How were the aqueducts influenced by the politics of the classical age? We have heard the term bread and circuses, but where would water fit into this equation? Finally, how has the modern Italian culture been shaped or affected by the fountains of culture built in the thousands of years before? Appius Claudius, a famous censor during the Republican era, constructed the first Roman aqueduct in 312 BC. However, it is difficult to take any precedence about the politics behind the aqueducts from this example, as projects taken during the Republican era were often based off a single influential individual.
One of the salient points of the Roman Republic, of course, is that they didn't have very much administration, not very much government, and of course they had their annual elected officials, but there weren't very many of those. And so it was handled somehow on a haphazard basis, and somebody might be very active and much engaged, like Appius Claudius Caecus, the famous censor, senator around 300 BC.
Il costruttore del primo acquedotto è anche il costruttore della prima via, della prima strada, la via Appia per l'appunto, che andava da Roma a Capua.
Like many aspects of the Roman government, with the rise of Augustus came great change.
Augustus was a major innovator, the first emperor, and because he held power for so long, it was possible for him as well to I think, really expand things and carry through these reforms, which very much focused on creating a more efficient government, and that can definitely be seen here in Rome.
La responsabilità dell'approvvigionamento di acqua per Roma viene in qualche modo assunta dall'imperatore.
He had his loyal friend Agrippa, who for quite some time was really in charge of the aqueduct administration, and actually in charge of having water flow to Rome and being distributed here. And then when Agrippa finally died in 12 BCE, that's when Augustus decided that we need to put it on a new footing, and he instituted a new office called the Curator Aquarum.
Under Agrippa, a formal office of the Curator Aquarum had been established. With his passing, he left many of his slaves in the hands of the state to act as formal maintenance crews for the aqueducts, setting a precedent of state-owned or employed personnel who operated under the order of the Curator Aquarum. Between Agrippa and Augustus, a system of grants for the use of water was established as well. The enforcement of these grants, as well as the protection of the aqueducts from illegal tapping, were under the jurisdiction of the Curator Aquarum. Years later, under Emperor Nerva Augustus, another great Curator Aquarum, Sextus Iulius Frontinus, came into office. Frontinus took great care in recording the history and specific statistics of all the major aqueducts feeding Rome at this time. It is from these records that historians have the most complete picture of the Roman aqueduct management.
Curator Aquarum, che è un senatore, il quale deve occuparsi della manutenzione degli acquedotti, del loro funzionamento di fatto.
Very high-ranking senator who obviously had a number of experts to help him in overseeing it all.
Frontinus's records give a great picture of how the imperial capital dealt with the implementation of a water system. But when seeking a smaller, more detailed look at how Roman infrastructure was affected by the aqueducts, we can look to the renowned city of Pompeii.
So we can look at Rome as an example of that for some of the resources that we say to study these things, like Frontinus. And the massive scale that provides us is a comparison to the microcosm that Pompeii gives us, which has more detail, versus something that's much larger that has more context.
We're here at the world-famous archaeological site of Pompeii. This city was destroyed and preserved at the same time by the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79. This city was supplied with the waters of an aqueduct, and here we can see a better example of how the common people of a Roman city, both private and publicly, were benefited by the flowing waters. Inside the city, there are numerous examples of public baths, private swimming pools, public basins, and even certain homes that were supplied with the running waters of the aqueduct.
The castellum at Pompeii was the water tower, where the waters from the aqueduct were diverted into the city. It is from here that we can begin to see how the Pompeian society was changed with the introduction of water. Aediles were commonly the public official that would deal with the more mundane aspects of city management. It is the first office along the cursus honorum, and the position was annually elected.
The introduction of the water system finds itself in a fully formed city. So what it adds is a new layer of complexity within the city, both in terms of its beneficial aspects of what it can provide, new resources, new opportunities, new ways of interacting with the city and living, making it a better place, but also it adds that level of complexity of management. How do you deal with extra water in the streets? How do you put together the systems that have to now interact, such as the traffic system and water system? And how do you put all that together in the human scale? Because somebody actually has to do it.
With the coming of this water, the Pompeians are bringing in more water than what they could actually use. And that was part of a process of satisfying the needs of water in the city, but also trying to flush the city out as well. And so what we find is that the aqueduct comes in, the fountains come in with the aqueduct, and then what we're left is with a lot of wastewater coming down this street down here. And so what they do is they throw in this drain behind here to channel some of that excess water out. And across the street, we also find these little stepping stones. People can actually get across the road without having to walk into the water.